I had been trekking the rugged mountain trails for days, chasing the elusive promise of untouched wilderness, when an uncanny feeling began to settle over me. The day had started as any other, a steady, almost meditative pace under a pale sky. But as I reached a narrow ridge overlooking a deep valley, everything shifted. There, nestled in the embrace of steep, shadowed slopes, I first saw it, a forest that seemed to defy the natural order of things. At first glance, it appeared no different from any other patch of wilderness. Yet, as I drew nearer, the forest's presence became impossibly surreal. The trees rose like ancient, silent guardians, their trunks twisted and gnarled with age, their leaves shimmering with a strange luminescence that seemed to pulse in time with the whispering wind. The colors were off, a blend of deep emeralds and shadowy grays that defied description, as if nature itself had painted the scene with hues reserved for dreams and nightmares alike. I stepped onto a narrow, overgrown path that led me into this mesmerizing world. With every careful step, the earth beneath my boots felt softer, almost as if it were absorbing not just my weight, but also my very presence. The ground was spongy, damp with moisture that hinted at secrets buried deep within the soil. There was a palpable energy in the air, an almost electric charge that sent shivers coursing along my spine. I couldn't shake the unsettling sensation that I had crossed an invisible threshold into a realm where time itself had lost its way. As I ventured deeper, the forest grew thicker and the light dimmer. A dense canopy of interwoven branches and leaves blocked out the sun, leaving the forest floor bathed in an eerie, diffuse twilight. Shadows danced unpredictably, shifting with every subtle movement, and it felt as though unseen eyes were constantly watching from the gloom. The usual chorus of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, had fallen silent, replaced by a heavy, oppressive quiet that made every heartbeat sound like a drum. The air here carried a scent that was both familiar and disquieting. There was the rich, loamy odor of earth and decaying leaves, mingled with a faint metallic tang that I couldn't quite place. A taste of something ancient and ominous lingering in the atmosphere. It was as if the forest exhaled a secret warning with every breath of wind that stirred the mist around me. I pressed on, driven by an inexplicable mix of awe and dread. With each step, the forest seemed to transform subtly, as if it were a living entity with a will of its own. The familiar landmarks I had noted on my map and in my memory vanished, replaced by an ever-changing maze of gnarled roots and tangled vines. The path I trod on twisted unexpectedly, leading me deeper into the heart of this mysterious place. I felt simultaneously drawn to and repelled by the forest's hypnotic allure. There was a moment when I stopped, frozen in the midst of an open glade. Here the silence was nearly complete, so absolute that I could hear my own rapid breathing echo in the stillness. I glanced around, my eyes straining to capture every detail. The way the trees leaned together as if conspiring, the subtle shimmer of dew on leaves that reflected an otherworldly glow, and the peculiar feeling that the forest was somehow alive, its pulse matching the rhythm of my own fear. In that charged silence, I realized that this was no ordinary woodland. Every instinct screamed that I had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something dangerous. The forest was a realm unto itself, a place that existed on the fringes of our known world, where the laws of nature and time seemed to warp and bend. It was as if I had entered a hidden dimension, one that revealed its secrets only to those who dared to step beyond the veil of the mundane. With a mixture of trepidation and morbid curiosity, I took a deep breath and ventured further into the depths of the forest, unaware that each step was binding me tighter to its dark and enigmatic embrace. What began as a simple hike had transformed into an encounter with a mystery that would haunt me long after I left the mountains behind. I pressed deeper into the tangled labyrinth, my earlier wonder slowly giving way to an unsettling dread. At first, the forest's beauty had captivated me, but now every step felt like a misstep into something far more sinister. I soon realized that this was no ordinary wilderness. Every path I trod on seemed designed to disorient, twisting back on itself until familiar landmarks vanished without a trace. I attempted to leave a mark, a small pile of stones here, a carved symbol on an old trunk there, but each effort was undone almost immediately, as though the forest itself was determined to erase all signs of my presence. In the fading light, a creeping chill took hold of me. The trees, once majestic and inviting, now loomed like ancient sentinels bent on concealing dark secrets. Their bark, rough and knotted, seemed to pulse with an eerie energy that defied natural explanation. Leaves that should have been vibrant were instead dull, almost lifeless, their colors washed out in a manner that spoke of decay rather than autumnal splendor. Even the undergrowth, soft and mossy moments before, now appeared overrun by shadow, its forms shifting imperceptibly as I moved. Desperate to document the anomaly, I retrieved my camera, a tool I had always trusted to capture reality. But as I raised it toward a particularly dense cluster of trees, the device betrayed me. The viewfinder filled with an impenetrable blur, an unyielding haze that refused to resolve into anything tangible. I fiddled with the focus, adjusted the settings, even restarted the camera in a frantic bid for clarity, but all in vain. It was as if the forest had conspired to hide its true visage from any means of human record, leaving only a ghostly impression behind. As dusk deepened into night, an oppressive silence descended. The usual chorus of nocturnal sounds, chirping crickets, rustling small animals, had been swallowed by a heavy, uncanny stillness. With every cautious step, I could sense the forest closing in around me, its presence more than just the sum of its trees and undergrowth. There was an underlying pulse to the silence, a slow, rhythmic throb that matched the rapid beating of my heart and seemed to emanate from deep within the forest's core. The further I ventured, the more the surroundings betrayed a disquieting uniformity. The familiar contours of the mountain trails I once knew had melted away into an endless expanse of twisted trunks and interlocking branches. I soon realized with mounting horror that the forest I had entered was not the one I remembered from previous hikes. It was as though I had stepped through a crack in reality into a parallel world, a shadow realm where nature had contorted into something both grotesque and mesmerizing. Every effort to retrace my steps was met with baffling inconsistency. The path I remembered was no longer there. Instead, I found myself caught in an ever-changing maze, where every turn led back to the same indistinguishable scene. Even the light itself seemed to betray me. Patches of moonlight that should have guided me through the gloom appeared and vanished unpredictably, as if the very fabric of the night was being rewritten by unseen hands. In a moment of stark terror, I encountered a clearing that defied the oppressive density of the forest. Here the canopy broke open to reveal a slice of the night sky, a sky that churned with dark, roiling clouds moving at an impossible pace. In the center of the clearing stood a solitary withered tree, its branches bare and contorted into grotesque shapes. The sight of this skeletal remnant was a jarring counterpoint to the lush chaos surrounding it, a silent harbinger of decay in a place that should have been teeming with life. I knelt before it, feeling an inexplicable pull, as though the tree were trying to communicate a dire warning through the language of despair. It was then that the horrifying truth began to crystallize in my mind. This forest was not merely a hidden part of the mountain. It was something otherworldly, a liminal space existing on the fringes of our reality. The forest had its own rhythm, its own laws, and I was an intruder in a realm that did not abide by the rules of time or nature. Every instinct screamed that I had crossed into a domain where human presence was not just unwelcome, but fundamentally dangerous. The overwhelming sense of isolation pressed down on me as I stood in that eerie clearing. Every attempt to orient myself was frustrated by the forest's relentless, shifting geometry. I could no longer rely on memory or logic. The forest was rewriting the landscape with every step I took. In that moment, it became painfully clear that I was caught in a trap, ensnared by a living, breathing enigma that did not intend to let me leave unscathed. In the dim glow of the moon, with the withered tree as my only sentinel, I realized that this was no accidental misfortune. The forest was alive in a way that defied understanding, a malignant force that absorbed and erased all traces of intrusion. Its very existence was a mystery, a puzzle of nature and time that had no place in the world I knew. And as I stood there, heart pounding with a mixture of terror and awe, I understood that my presence here had upset a delicate, ancient balance. I was an interloper in a realm that should never have been disturbed, and every moment I lingered only deepened the danger that lurked within the shadows. With every fiber of my being screaming to flee, I took a hesitant step backward, acutely aware that the forest had already begun its silent, relentless assault on my very soul. The distorted landscape around me, the vanishing trails, and the mocking failure of my own tools all conspired to confirm the horrifying reality. I was not meant to be here. The forest, in its terrifying, otherworldly beauty, was a place that should never be found twice, and now, I feared, it was determined to ensure that I would never leave at all. As the daylight faded into a dismal twilight, I felt an unsettling urgency urging me to leave. The forest, which had once revealed itself in a curious interplay of beauty and dread, now transformed into a forbidding labyrinth of shadows and twisted paths. Determined to retrace my steps and escape its suffocating embrace, I began my journey back. But almost immediately, I discovered that nothing was as it should be. The familiar trail that I had meticulously noted in my mind had dissolved into an endless maze of gnarled roots and deceptive clearings. Every step I took led me deeper into an unchanging horror. I found myself looping through the same twisted corridors of towering silent trees that seemed to conspire against any notion of escape. The path I remembered so clearly had betrayed me. It vanished into the undergrowth and reappeared in a distorted version of itself. It was as if the forest had become a living puzzle, rearranging its pieces with malicious intent. I turned left, then right, only to find myself in a clearing that I had seen moments before, a clearing with a solitary, withered oak standing as a grim monument to lost hope. The realization struck me with a cold, paralyzing terror. I was trapped. The forest was no longer a static expanse of nature. It had morphed into an active, almost sentient entity that reshaped its own layout with every passing minute. The once inviting hues of green and brown had been replaced by an oppressive darkness, punctuated by fleeting pockets of weak, inconsistent light. Each movement of the trees, each subtle shift in the ground beneath my feet, confirmed that I was no longer walking through a natural landscape, but through a nightmare designed to ensnare me. Panic surged through my veins as I tried to force myself to remember the route back to safety. My mind, once clear and methodical, was now clouded by dread and confusion. Every direction looked the same, every turn led to a dead end, and every step felt heavier than the last, as though the forest itself were weighing down my escape with invisible chains. I began to run, desperate to outpace the relentless pull of this living maze, but the forest responded with an eerie stillness that belied my frantic pace. The ground, soft and yielding underfoot, seemed to conspire with the darkness, swallowing my footprints as if to erase any evidence of my passage. Time lost all meaning. Moments stretched into what felt like hours as I wandered through an endless loop of indistinguishable scenery. I passed the same gnarled tree, the same twisted clearing, again and again, each repetition intensifying the sense of futility that clawed at my mind. The oppressive silence was a constant reminder of my isolation. There were no distant sounds of life, no reassuring echoes of civilization. Only the sound of my own ragged breathing filled the void, a relentless metronome marking my descent into terror. The deeper I ventured, the more the forest revealed its true nature. It was not simply a collection of trees and undergrowth, but a malevolent force that defied the laws of nature. The layout of the forest was fluid, its boundaries shifting in a maddening dance. Landmarks I once recognized twisted into unrecognizable forms, and paths that once promised escape now led only to further entrapment. I tried to steady my shaking hands and retrace my steps, but the forest mocked my efforts by rearranging itself at every turn. I realized with mounting horror that the very fabric of this place was woven from the threads of illusion and dread. Desperation overtook me as I began to question my own sanity. Had I truly entered this cursed forest by chance, or had something unseen lured me into its depths? Each moment, every step, was a reminder that I was an intruder in a realm that was never meant for human eyes. The walls of trees closed in, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out any remnants of the outside world. Shadows lengthened and merged, creating spectral forms that seemed to flit at the edge of my vision, taunting me with the possibility that I was not alone. I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart pounding so fiercely it threatened to shatter my composure. With every labored breath, I felt the weight of the forest's malevolence pressing closer, as if the very air were saturated with an ancient, unforgiving despair. My attempts to find an exit were met with a cruel irony. The forest, as if aware of my plight, appeared to guide me deeper into its clutches rather than toward freedom. In every direction, the scenery repeated itself with a maddening precision, as though I were doomed to wander an infinite loop of terror. At last, as I paused to catch my breath in a small clearing, a cold, crushing certainty settled over me. I was lost, irrevocably and utterly lost. The forest had ensnared me in its labyrinth, erasing all evidence of the path that once led out. The panic that surged through me was not just fear of being trapped, but a profound dread of what might eventually befall me in this realm of shifting shadows and deceptive echoes. In that chilling moment, I understood that the forest was not merely a place. It was a living nightmare, a dark anomaly in the fabric of reality that had no intention of letting me go. In the oppressive gloom of that endless maze, with every step forward feeling like a step deeper into oblivion, I realized that my desperate bid for escape was but a futile resistance against a force far greater and more inscrutable than I could ever comprehend. The forest, with its ever-changing paths and soul-crushing silence, had claimed me as one of its own, a lost wanderer in a realm where no one could ever find their way out twice. As I stumbled deeper into the heart of the forest, the oppressive silence that had once blanketed the woods began to crack. At first, it was nothing more than a soft murmur, a barely perceptible rustle of sound that I almost convinced myself was merely the wind. But as I pressed on, the murmurs grew into distinct voices, disembodied and echoing from every direction. I strained my ears, trying to catch words or names, but they slipped through my consciousness like water through my fingers. It was as if the forest had awakened a language of its own, speaking in a dialect of despair and warning. The voices came in layers, some gentle and sorrowful, others harsh and urgent. They seemed to whisper secrets of ages past, reciting fragmented tales of lost souls and ancient tragedies. At times, the whispers merged into a single, overwhelming chorus, as if the very trees were confessing their hidden sins. I found myself frozen, heart pounding, as I tried to distinguish one phrase from another. Each syllable resonated deep within me, stirring a sense of foreboding that was almost tangible. No matter which direction I turned, there was no source to be found. The sounds emerged from the very fabric of the forest, melding with the rustling leaves and the creaking of ancient branches. And then, as if punctuating the eerie symphony, I began to notice something even more disconcerting. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, with a deliberate, almost sentient rhythm. With every step I took, the soil undulated subtly, and the familiar patterns of roots and undergrowth rearranged themselves in bewildering configurations. At moments, I caught fleeting glimpses of figures moving at the periphery of my vision, shadows that darted behind trees and vanished when I turned to look. These silhouettes were never fully formed, always obscured by the shifting gloom. Yet their presence was undeniable, as if the forest itself had birthed specters to accompany the voices. The air grew heavy with the metallic scent of something ancient and unsettling, a reminder that this place was not bound by the simple laws of nature. As I moved forward, the landscape began to change in alarming ways. The trees, which had once stood in silent, predictable rows, now twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches curling like the fingers of unseen hands reaching out from the darkness. The terrain morphed beneath my feet, a clear, well-trodden path one moment, and an impassable tangle of brambles the next. It was as if the forest was actively reshaping itself, creating a labyrinth where every turn brought with it a new nightmare. In the midst of this disorientation, the voices took on an even more menacing tone. Some words were sharp and biting, laden with a threat that sent shivers racing down my spine. I could almost feel the weight of their implications, a dire warning that trespassers were not meant to linger here. The whispers began to form phrases, half-heard sentences that spoke of punishment, of a debt that must be repaid, and of a fate worse than oblivion for those who dared disturb the ancient order of this cursed place. Every now and then, a solitary, louder exclamation would cut through the murmur like a shard of ice, a sound akin to a door slamming shut in the distance. There were no buildings here, no remnants of civilization to explain such a noise. Instead, it seemed to signal the closing of a portal, a barrier between this world and another realm of unspeakable horror. The realization that the forest might be a gateway, a threshold to something far more sinister, filled me with a paralyzing dread. With every step, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred further. The shifting landscape conspired with the voices to erase all semblance of order, leaving me adrift in a realm where every sound and movement was a calculated threat. I felt as though I were caught in a waking dream, one where the forest was alive, malevolent, and determined to keep its secrets hidden at any cost. The deeper I ventured, the more the whispers seemed to press in on me, their cumulative weight a constant reminder of my vulnerability. I could no longer tell if the voices were guiding me toward an exit or luring me deeper into the abyss. The forest's language was indecipherable, its messages a cryptic mix of invitation and menace. Each whispered warning echoed in my mind, urging me to abandon hope and surrender to the inevitability of being consumed by this living nightmare. In that disorienting moment, I understood with a cold clarity that the forest was not merely a collection of trees and underbrush. It was an ancient, sentient force that spoke in voices older than time. Its shifting landscape and haunting murmurs were a declaration of its dominion over this realm, a realm where I was an intruder unworthy of escape. And as the voices rose once more into a cacophony of despair, I could only pray that my next step would not seal my fate forever in this haunted wilderness. I emerged from the forest like a man exhumed from a nightmare. My body trembled uncontrollably as I found myself at the edge of the twisted, malignant woodland, a place where the very air seemed tainted by a sinister presence. The path that once twisted endlessly through the labyrinth of trees now lay open and clear, almost beckoning me toward the safety of the known world. Yet even in that moment of apparent escape, I felt the heavy, lingering weight of something profoundly wrong. Every instinct screamed that the forest had not truly released its hold on me. The oppressive silence of that cursed realm still echoed in my mind, carrying with it faint, ghostly warnings that I could never quite forget. It was as if the forest had imprinted a piece of its dark soul upon me, a relentless reminder that I had trespassed in a realm not meant for human beings. The path out was a cruel illusion, a temporary reprieve from a nightmare that was always just a heartbeat away from reclaiming its victim. Once I stepped into the open, the cool night air hit me with a jarring clarity. The relief was palpable, yet tainted by an undercurrent of dread. I stumbled along the trail, my senses still haunted by the disquieting murmurs and shifting shadows of the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every distant groan of wind against the trees sent a surge of panic through my veins, as if the very wilderness were conspiring to drag me back into its inescapable clutches. Days later, I attempted to piece together the fragments of that surreal ordeal. Eager to confront the evidence of what I had experienced, I retrieved my camera, the one tool that had once promised to capture the truth of the forest's impossible beauty. But when I scrolled through the images, my heart sank. The memory cards were barren, filled with nothing but blank screens where the twisted silhouettes of ancient trees and ghostly mists should have been. It was as if the forest had deliberately erased every trace of its existence, determined to leave behind nothing but a void of unanswered questions. I could not shake the overwhelming sense that the forest was not merely a physical location, but a living, breathing anomaly, a portal to another realm where time and memory were warped beyond recognition. That night, as I lay awake, haunted by the echo of whispers that no longer belonged to this world, I realized that my escape had been only partial. The forest had left its mark on me, a persistent dread that whispered of its inevitable return. Driven by a desperate need for closure, I returned to the mountain trail the following day. I hoped to find a remnant of that strange, ephemeral world, a final sign that could explain the impossible. But when I arrived, the spot where the forest had once loomed was now nothing more than an unremarkable expanse of rugged terrain. There were no signs of the twisted canopy, no hint of that otherworldly glow, only the stark, barren truth of nature, indifferent and cold. The absence was a terror in itself, a confirmation that the forest was a fleeting phantom, visible only to those cursed to witness its transient existence. In the silence of that desolate landscape, a single haunting thought took root. If the forest could vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the raw, aching fear of what it represented, then what other dark, inexplicable phenomena might lurk at the edge of our reality? I was left with the lingering terror that I had been marked by forces far beyond human understanding, a silent warning that one day, when the world least expects it, the forest might return to claim its due. Now, as I live with the constant, oppressive memory of that night, I cannot help but wonder if my escape was ever truly complete. The forest's malevolent influence remains like a shadow over my every step, a grim reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but rather to haunt us forever.